Welcome to listen to the horror stories brought by Infinite Fantasy. If you like it, please subscribe to this channel.
I can't forget the cold of that night. As our expedition ship, the Fearless, ventured deep into the Arctic Circle, all that surrounded us were icebergs illuminated by moonlight. I was the radio operator, Robert Klein, responsible for receiving and transmitting all communication signals. However, that night, I received something that shouldn't exist. At first, it was faint, barely audible sounds coming from deep within the icebergs. They seemed to be calling out, in a tone our language couldn't describe. I tried to tell the others, but they dismissed it, thinking it was just the natural noise of ice collision. But then, those sounds became clearer, audible to almost everyone. Their frequency was unsettling, their melody frightening. Moreover, as we delved deeper into the ice, anomalies began. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. Mentally stable crew members began experiencing auditory hallucinations, paranoia, and even aggression. I remember Dr. Harris started drawing frantically, his strokes wild, filled with incomprehensible symbols, claiming they were communicated to him by the entities below the ice. Soon after, he disappeared into a cold night, never to be found. Panic spread throughout the ship. People began suspecting each other, and incidents of violence occurred repeatedly. In the endless daylight, nobody could truly sleep. We were all trapped in the embrace of this icy sea, with those voices seemingly mocking our ignorance and frailty. In the end, when the rescue team found us, they discovered the Fearless stranded on the ice, with the ship in disarray and traces of blood everywhere. They found only me, shivering and incoherent, sitting in a corner. The rescue team found our recording device on the boat, which recorded everything since we heard those sounds. But when they played the recording, they heard nothing but the wind and our terrified screams. I know they don't believe me, but I swear, those voices are real. They're just under the ice, waiting for the next unlucky traveler. Ever since we moved into this old house, I felt something was off. The house was an unexpected inheritance, secluded in the outskirts. I tried to tell myself that it was just a phase of adjustment to a new life, but deep down, I couldn't shake an inexplicable unease. Nights were the worst. When everything settled into silence, the sounds I overlooked during the day became pronounced. The faint creaking, the whispers in the air, barely audible, and that chilling sensation of something lurking in the dark, watching us with its invisible eyes. I noticed changes in my family. The kids became restless, plagued with nightmares, and my partner, there was a gloom in her eyes that I couldn't decipher. At midnight, I would occasionally wake up to a bizarre whimpering sound, as if right next to my ear. But upon opening my eyes, there was only the consuming darkness and the shadows, which seemed to grow denser. One evening, as the lights in the house dimmed, every corner seemed to harbor mysterious entities. I could feel them watching, maybe our every move, or the secrets deep within our hearts. This fear began to subtly alter us. I avoided eye contact with my family and grew to despise my reflection in the mirror. Those shadows, those eyes, they haunted me relentlessly. I began to question whether it was all in my head or if the house itself harbored unspeakable secrets. I sought answers only to find myself sinking deeper into an inescapable maze. Until one night, I finally saw the eyes clearly. They belonged to no one. They existed independently, like souls trapped in this space, gazing at us with hollow, yearning eyes. I couldn't read their intentions, but I felt a despair emanating from them, penetrating my soul. I stopped seeking answers. Perhaps there are things we are not meant to understand. But what's certain is that our lives have been altered by these invisible eyes, and I can never return to the carefree person I used to be. Since moving into this old apartment building, I had been troubled by occasional knocking sounds from next door. In the stillness of the night, these sounds would come from beyond the wall, intermittent and steady, like mischievous ghosts. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself it was just the groaning of an old house. Curiosity led me to knock on my neighbor's door one day. I stood before the worn door, tapping my fingers against the wood, waiting. However, apart from my heartbeat, only dead silence answered. Days later, I mentioned this to the superintendent in passing. He looked at me with surprise, his expression grave. He informed me that the adjacent apartment had been vacant for years. The last tenant had mysteriously disappeared after a family tragedy, and since then, no one dared to live there. His words sent shivers down my spine. Were those knocks? That night, the knocking returned, more frequent and urgent. Each strike resonated with a vibe of despair and pleading at the core of my being. I clutched my blanket, eyes shut, but the fear within took root and grew like ivy. Days later, at midnight, I mustered the courage to uncover the truth. I took a flashlight and approached that door. After a deep breath, I slowly opened it. Darkness met me head-on, with only the beam of my flashlight piercing through the all-consuming black. The room was empty, with a few pieces of old furniture silently speaking of the past. I stepped inside, looking around. That's when the door shut abruptly, trapping me in darkness. Panic set in, and my flashlight's beam began to falter. As I thought the darkness would consume me, I heard faint breathing. I lifted my flashlight, the light focusing on a shadow in the corner. It was a human figure, sitting on the floor, silently swaying. I could hardly breathe, and the shadow, sensing me, slowly lifted its head. Under the flashlight, I saw that face, twisted by despair. It was my neighbor, who had vanished, leaving behind endless loneliness and sorrow. I don't remember how I escaped that room or what happened afterwards. All I recall is when I got back to my place, the knocking had ceased. In its place, deep sympathy and boundless fear intermingled within me, inseparable ever since. In a place swallowed by endless darkness, John collapsed helplessly onto the cold floor. His fingers trembled as they brushed across his forehead, feeling the stream of cold sweat. The dream imprisoned him over and over again, in this endless corridor, where behind every door he'd passed he refused to confront. He rose again, his footsteps echoing through the empty hallway, rhythmic like drumbeats, urging him forward. Scenes behind the doors started to flash in his mind, his various unbearable memories: deceit, betrayal, cowardly escape. Each choice was like a brand iron stamped on the soul, too hot to touch. Opening yet another door, John was confronted with his deception to the person he loved years ago. The familiar face twisted in shadows, filled with unimaginable pain. He tried to reach out, but his body was dragged by invisible chains, immobilized. He backed out of the room in terror, his heart pounding as if it was about to tear him apart. Heavy breathing became almost all of his voice, every inch of air in the corridor solidified into the weight of his guilt. However, when he ran to the end of the hallway, hoping to find an exit, the scene suddenly became bizarrely twisted, bringing him back to the starting point. The walls, like living things, surrounded tightly, and every breath seemed to inhale thick despair. John trembled in despair, every cell soaked in fear. This nightmare was his bottomless abyss, his inescapable personal hell. He no longer tried to open doors or seek escape. He just sat quietly in a corner of the hallway, letting the darkness and silence erode his consciousness, waiting for the dawn that he didn't know when would come. It was an unusual night, and the wind hissed through the exposed branches, as if a preview of the horror to come. Jack tossed and turned in his apartment, unable to sleep. Whenever he was about to fall into sleep, the uneasiness in his heart would pull him back into uneasy wakefulness. Finally, he fell asleep, but fell into a strange dream. In the dream, he was in a dark, blurry space, and the surroundings seemed to be filled with low cries. Suddenly, a woman's figure appeared in front of him. Her hair was messy and her body was shaking. The most frightening thing is that there are no features on her face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth skin. She made an indescribable sound, not a human sound, but a painful, desperate whimper. She reached out as if to grab Jack, but he flinched, terrified as he had never been before. My face was stolen. The woman conveyed this message to Jack in a supernatural way that the audience could relate to. Jack tried to escape in fear, but no matter which direction he ran, he could not escape this space. The woman's whimpering seemed to come from every direction, making it impossible to locate. When he suddenly woke up from his dream, covered in cold sweat, it was already dark. He felt an emptiness he had never felt before, as if the horrors of his dreams were still lingering inside him. He staggered to the bathroom, trying to sober up with the cold water. When he looked up at the mirror, his legs weakened and he almost fell to his knees. His face was gone. No, to be precise, his facial features were missing. Just like the woman in the dream, there was only a piece of smooth skin left on his face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. He wanted to scream, but without a mouth he couldn't make any sound. He touched his smooth, moist face, his heart filled with indescribable panic. Is this real? Or is the nightmare going to continue? Jack felt like he was being gripped by invisible fear. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even cry for help. He begins to question everything, his existence, the world, and the unexplainable dream. He looked like a cursed soul in the mirror. Without a face, he couldn't even express his inner panic. That crying woman, that faceless woman, what is she? Why did she appear in his dream? Where did her face go? Also, what should he do now? Jack felt that he was falling into a maze with no exit, and an inescapable loneliness and fear enveloped him. Outside, a new day has begun, and the sun shines on Jack's face through the window, but he doesn't feel any warmth. In his world, everything has become strange and terrifying.